wasn't OpenWrite and this wasn't a raw file. But
can you nest a raw file?
Yes, you can.
Holy crap.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
that,
I think you should get on a different computer. Yeah, the dual eliminate DNG again is the double DNG. This is actually designed to be to build one. You don't have an image in here, but you can build this guy under a single profile.
Sorry, guys.
Two lighting conditions representing daylight and dusk. Okay. Let's get back to it. Okay, a couple of very good questions came up in this discussion. So when we opened up the Coca-Cola, so go ahead and double click the Coca-Cola guy again to open it up. This is a PSD file. This is a baked file. This is not raw data. This has already been, it was generated. It's a baked file. It's a PSD. There was no CR2 file of this. There was no NEF file. That did not exist. So when we turn this into a smart object, again, up to layer, down to smart object convert, this is now a smart object. And again, if I double click on it, it opens up and it pulls the image out. However, in the past, when we've been double clicking on our raw files, we go back into Camera Raw. That's because we have the raw data available to us. So they're both smart objects. They both functions like smart objects. It's just that this one doesn't have the raw data underneath. So when I'm double clicking on it, I do not get a raw file. I don't get the raw information that is actually in Camera Raw. Make sense? So, and then the other question that I had about this, and we should go after this right away, is if you want to copy your workspace. So if you've gone to all the problem of building or retouching workspace, let me get out of Capture One so I'm not confused. So you've built this, let's say we built this, let me get mine to go back to to reset mine. So everybody's kind of back to normal. Get this guy up. This guy slightly down. Get rid of this guy. Finally get this back down. Okay, so this is the workspace that you want to have. Remember, the thing about workspaces is it will remember the location of all your palettes. What it doesn't remember, or what I've never been able to get it to remember, is where this application frame ends up landing. As a rule in our retouching class, what you're going to want to do is this. You're going to want to have the application frame so that it rides up on top. You'll see that my palette over here that's got the info on it is a little bit low. And the reason for that is that you need to be able to see this is where all your options change up here. So for instance, if I click on the quick selection tool, it changes these options up here. If you've got this thing all the way up, you can't get at your options. So you need this thing down slightly. There's less interference that goes on this side over here, but typically what I do is I end my application space so that it hits right on the edge of this set of palettes right here and right at the bottom. But again, this is not something that gets saved with your workspace. The palettes and their locations will be saved, but the application guy doesn't get saved. And then you get into another problem. If, like me, when I actually plug a projector in, it completely changes the screen resolution of my laptop to match the projector. So it all goes to hell when that happens. But nonetheless, that's that. So anyway, to save this, once you've saved this thing, what's the workspace called for, do they actually name it? Do they just call it retouching? Okay, so to get to, so anyway, to find it, again, sometimes this is easier than not. Again, you need to do the same thing. You need to get to your library. Remember, so we're in the Finder. If you can't immediately see the library, again, holding down the Option key, holding down the Go menu, adding the Option key makes it available to you. Apple, the reason Apple is hiding this thing, it used to be visible all the time, but Apple started to hide it because people were going in here and doing shit into the library that could actually cause your system to become unstable. So they felt like if they hid it from you, that you couldn't screw it up, but then they gave you a way to find it. So nonetheless, we're gonna go into the library, and I'm fairly certain, again, I've got to go looking for this, but I think this is where it is. In application support, well, actually, this is the location. Actually, this is in our Moodle site. So if you go into the Moodle site, if we go to our site, again, scroll all the way down. Week 1, CS preferences, locations, open this guy up. And what we're looking for is the I think it's this guy. So it's in the user library, application support, Adobe Color, and then in settings. So in the library, under application support, under Adobe, it says under color, what did it say, color settings?
No, that's color workspaces is lower on the PDF.
Oh, so it's actually, oh, what does it say down there?
So you have to scroll down on the PDF.
Oh.
There's like an actual workspaces one.
Oh, you're right here. Workspaces, oh, it's not actually in application support. Why on earth would Adobe put it there, fuckers? Okay, so here's where it is instead. So again, into a library, not application support, but in preferences, right here, then into Adobe, that's what they're saying, right? Adobe Photoshop. So it's going to be here in Adobe Photoshop. It'll be CC, in my case, CC 2015.5. It's in there. And then inside that is going to be working spaces. There's 2 folders in here. One of them is just listed as working spaces. The other is actually working spaces modified. It will be in one of those spaces. And in my case, so for instance, I'm working in my color space right now is this Epson Projector 2. It's this file right here. If you copy this file to your hard drive and keep it with you forever, then whenever you get on somebody else's machine, you simply copy it into this exact same folder and it will be available to you. Okay, and it just saves you having to build this thing over and over and over again. Okay, let's open up the Coca-Cola thing one last time. I want to show you there's 2 last things that I really want to show you about Smart Objects. So if you don't remember where it is, you can actually just go up to the file menu down to recent and open Coca-Cola logo and it will actually open up. I'm going to do the same trick I did before. I'm going to actually drag this down to make a copy of it. I'm going to select the background, hit the D key to get my colors, foreground and background to default. I'm going to hold down Command Delete. That fills my background with white. I'm going to make my image larger by going to Canvas size and changing my drop-down menu to inches. And I'm also going to change this height to 11. So basically, this gets me back to where I was. I'm going to click on this thing to actually make it a smart object again. So up to layer, down to smart object, convert to smart object. This is a smart object now. Now again, one of the tenets about having your files protected is that you can't screw them up. So that's why I can't paint on this thing. It's why I can't clone this thing. However, there's a number of things that I can do with this thing. So for instance, I can blur this thing. So I'm going to come up to the filter menu and I'm going to come down to blur and I'm going to come down to Gaussian blur and I'm going to put a blur on there of 25, a radius of 25, which is going to blur the shit out of it. And I'm going to say, okay. And you say to me, well, Verser, you shouldn't be able to do that because you just ruined that image. And I'm going to say to you, well, you need to look at what happened to the layers palette. And what's going on in the layers palette, you'll see, is this thing called smart filters. So what I've got going on now is my smart object is still protected. My smart filter is giving me the illusion that this has been blurred. But if I double click on this smart object, you'll see that the image that's sitting inside here, it's fine. It hasn't been, nothing has been done to it. It's still protected. But I have this thing down here called smart filters. And right here, you will see that there's a thing that says Gaussian blur. If you turn off the eyeball down here, that goes away. If you turn the eyeball back on, you get it back again. Even better, if you double click on Gaussian blur, it remembers that you did a blur of 25. So you can now change this. So let's say we'll go up to a blur of 76 and click OK. You can save this file. You can close it up. When you open it up again, this thing will be sitting here just like it was. And when you double click on it, you will see that it has 76 in here, and you can change it back again. So again, you've got this smart object that is protecting all of this work. It's just amazing in its strength. But there's a bonus. So if you put your image up big like this, go ahead and do your blur on it. I've got a 25% blur on mine. What you'll also notice right next to this thing that says Smart Filters is this white block right here. This is actually a mask for your smart filters. So you can hit the B key to get, if you click, and we need to be working on this smart object mask, so you need to click on it to make it active. You'll see that you get the little brackets around it. Then you can hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to, again, the very second you get a brush, your eyes should be jumping up to this options bar up here at the top. I'm going to click on my drop-down menu to check to see what my hardness of this brush is. It is 0% hardness, which is a very soft edge brush. That's good. I'm going to click outside of that to get my drop-down menu to go away. I want a normal blending mode, 100% opacity, and 100% flow. I'm working on the mask for this filter. I'm going to hit the D key to make sure my colors are defaulted, the X key to give myself black. I'm going to actually make my brush a little bit larger, and I can now paint with a filter. What? If you don't like that, you can do the reverse. Remember, this is a mask. It works just the opposite way. Hit the X key to get white as your foreground color, and you can paint this back in. You can do all sorts of things on this mask. Again, the mask is active. If you want to fill this mask with white, white is now my foreground color. Hold down the Option and hit delete, and it gets rid of all the work that I've done. I can go to the gradient tool. The gradient tool is right in the middle of your tool palette. Some people's will be set up as the paint bucket. Again, you need to click and hold this on this icon to get the drop-down menu. Make sure that the gradient tool is selected. When the gradient tool is selected, you have a series of options for the gradient tool. The first is this click drop-down up here. This actually establishes what gradient tool you're using. And I want you to click the very first of the gradient drop-downs. If you hover over this long enough or click and hold of it long enough, eventually you'll get what this is. And what this is giving you is foreground color to background color. The next one would be foreground color to transparency. You'll see it right here. Every now and then those little tags will pop open. The next one over is black to white, which is the same as this one right here because my foreground and background colors are black to white. But nonetheless, so you want to select that. Click again in your up here in this top area to get that drop-down menu to go away. Make sure your opacity is at 100%. The rest of this should be at their defaults. Then if you come down to your image right down here and click on the left-hand side and drag to the right-hand side, we're actually going to just drop a gradient on this mask. And you'll see you can actually emulate focus that you can emulate, not emulate. You can actually have one area of your image be relatively sharp, and as you move into another direction of your image that you actually get it to fall off and start to be more blurry. This is actually in compositing work how we emulate depth of field. To show you how that really works, when you think about depth of field, now we're going to do depth of field right to left, which is not how it works. Depth of field actually works foreground to background, but I'm going to show you what actually creates the sort of illusion of that. In depth of field, typically what's really close to the camera is out of focus. Then you end up with an area that is in focus, and then the background goes soft again, right? So your depth of field is not like this. And what's happening here is I've got one area that's in focus. One area that's sharp, and then it just drops off and it goes out of focus. Well, that's not really how depth of field works. What depth of field should do is this front area should be out of focus, the middle should be in focus, and the back area out of focus again. That's simply a different one of these gradient pulls. If you look again up here at the top, this first one is a linear pull, and it's exactly what we just did. If you hold down your Option key and click on this mask, you can actually see the gradient itself. It shows it to you. It's a linear pull. We went from foreground white to black background. However, you can do different types of gradient pulls. So for instance, if you select on the next little icon that's up here at the top, this is a radial gradient. So now if you click in the middle and drag out, this is what you get. This is the pattern you get on your gradient. If you go to the next one over, this is a polygonal gradient pull, and you can see again how that happens. And then finally, this last one, which is the one we want, starts foreground to background to foreground. So again, I'm going to click all the way on the side. I'm going to drag across. If you add the shift key, it will actually do this straight across as a 90-degree. And that did not do what it said it was going to do. I would say that's a bug. What's supposed to be happening is, let me see if we do it halfway. Well, that doesn't really seem right to me, but that's what it's supposed to look like. So now what's happening, I'm going from the center out. So it's giving me a gradient. I guess that is how it's sort of supposed to work. But nonetheless, these black areas right here are going to be masking off the filtering effect. The white areas are actually going to be allowing the filtering effect to actually come through. So again, if you click back up on this, you can see that that's basically, this is the inverted version of what a depth of field should be. So to invert this mask, simply hit Command-I, and you'll get, so this is kind of how you would emulate depth of field. We start out of focus, we move into focus, and then we go out of focus again. Again, I'm going left to right, which is not the way it would actually be. We would be doing all this on an image, and we would be doing foreground into background, which would typically be from the bottom of your frame up to the top. But it's a way you emulate depth of field in Photoshop once we get to compositing. Are there questions about this? Finally, in all of this, if you actually do need to do some work on this layer, we need to have a rasterized version of this guy. And what rasterizing is basically the opposite of making a smart object. It makes it a stupid object. If you want it to have this filter already applied to it, you simply select your top layer right here. You hold down the Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. This will do a merge stamp of everything that is visible, and it actually rasterizes the image, and you can tell that's what's happened. So it merged everything that happened here. If we had layers on this that were visible, if we had other layers that had painting on it, if we had type on this, all of that, this process that we just did, Command, Option, Shift, E merges it into a single layer. We go into this, and we'll do this forever throughout this class. So if you can't remember it now, don't worry. We bump into it again. If you've done this, go ahead and click on this layer, throw it away. If you turn off the Smart Filter, and again, select the top layer, Command, Option, Shift, and hit the letter E. Again, you will get another version of this. It does not include the blurring because we had the visibility of that blurring turned off. As a matter of fact, it did include the white background down on the bottom. If you throw this layer away and turn off the black background on the bottom, and we've only got transparency. Again, holding down the, making sure that the top layer is selected. Command, Option, Shift, E will do nothing because they're not, you need to have more than one layer to actually have that take effect. So instead, if you need a rasterized version of this layer, you can simply drag it down to make a copy of it. So I'm simply dragging it down to the dog-eared guy. It's also copying the Smart Filter. That's fine. I doubt it's going to have any impact on this guy at all once we rasterize it. This top layer is now selected. It is a smart object. It is a true clone of this one right down here. So if I opened up either one of them and inverted it, the other one would invert as well. But if you go up to the layer menu, down to Smart Object, and down to Rasterize, that's one way to get to it. The second way to get to it is also, you'll see right under two layers under this smart object right here is Rasterize, and then down to Smart Object. Either way does the exact same thing. So either Smart Object, Rasterize, or Rasterize Smart Object, either way, it will turn that thing into a stupid layer. This is now no longer connected to this. So again, you'll see if I double click and open this guy up, invert it, and close it up and save it, you will see that the link has been broken between these two. On this top layer, you can also take a brush and paint. It hasn't been, it's not protected. It's not a smart object any longer. And there's many reasons that we do this, specifically to be able to clone on this, to be able to paint on these things, all the above. All right, we can close this guy up. We've actually done everything that we can do with the Coca-Cola thing, although you do get the Coca-Cola guy later in this class. You see him again. Okay, so I'm not going to do linear again. Okay, so we're going to start on your homework. Aren't you happy? And your homework is a file that you've seen before and come to love. So it is the Bruce Fraser Castle again. Oh, Jesus, first, you're not going to throw that thing at me again. Hey, I'm doing your homework for you. So... and if you guys had any idea how many times I've done this file, I almost should have these things memorized. So again, you're looking for in class 3 files in your folders. There is that copy of the Bruce Fraser 2005 DNG. If you double click on him to open him up, you will open it up in Camera Raw. You may or may not have these, the most recent of these file settings in here. If you don't, I'm going to give them to you again right now. However, I want you to look up at my screen and notice this right now. See this little exclamation point right down here? That little exclamation point down there is telling me, it's right down here at the very bottom right-hand side of my screen, of this screen. That's actually a warning to me that this is being processed with not the most recent version of Camera Raw. That's the warning telling me that. So if you look at my screen right here, you'll see that this is, I'm going to click on my 2000, I'm on the camera calibration. You'll see that this is processing 2010. If, on the other hand, if you simply click on this exclamation point, it will take this to 2012 or whatever is the most current version. However, I want to use the 2010 version of it because that's the numbers that I've got for you to enter. So if you're not seeing this same thing here that's got recovery and fill light in here, go to your camera icon up here at the top, click on process on the drop-down menu, go to version 2010, and then I can give you the values that we need to put in here. So we're actually going to do this all over again the way we did it, but we're going to do this the smart way with smart objects. So I need you to select, for the very first thing, color temperature, 6,800 degrees. And hang on one second, because I got to go back to get the other values. You may have these already in here, or you may not. Okay, 6,800 degrees for your color temperature. Hit the tab key. 7 for the tint, the tab key. Minus 0.95 for your exposure, tab key. Recovery is at 0, tab key. Fill is at 0, tab key. Blacks are at 18, tab key. Brightness is at 81, tab key. Contrast is at 56, tab key. Clarity is at 52, tab key. Vibrance is at 35, tab key, and saturation is 0. Have we gone over this, what's really going on in the Camera Raw panel? Did we ever discuss this?
Yeah.
The most recent version, not this version? Okay, I just want to make sure you guys were more feeling good about what all these things actually were and do. Now, in this case, we want to work using smart objects. As a matter of fact, one of the arguments that I've made is that this should be your workflow from now on. There's a problem with a couple of things in here. To actually work with smart objects, you've got to come in through Camera Raw. I just had a discussion with Andrew about actually working on smart objects, and he prefers to do his processing in C1 Pro. A lot of people do, especially if you're doing fashion and beauty, because C1 Pro actually processes, in a lot of people's opinions, mine included, it actually processes skin tones better than Camera Raw does. Camera Raw, I always feel like it actually puts a little too much red in the skin tones. It's not something that you can't get rid of. You can. It's just an extra step. And doing it in C1 Pro, in Camera Raw, again, it's just the extra step. It can be done, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of that. The downside to doing your stuff in in C1 Pro is that when you process the file, you do not get the leverage of smart objects, which is what I'm going to show you right now. You end up with a TIFF file that you then bring in. You can bring in multiple TIFF files that do the dodging and burning processing, just like you guys did it last week. That's the reason I still show you how to do what we did last week. Again, you would do the same thing. You would process one for the ground and the castle. You would do a second TIFF for the sky. Bring both of those into Photoshop. Put them together. Put a mask on it to reveal the darker sky, and you'd be good to go. Doing it with smart objects using Camera Raw is well, you'll see the advantages right now. So that's what we're going to do. In order to actually get this to be a permanent process instead of changing, because right now, does your thing right down here say open object or open image? Open image. If you hold down the shift key, it'll say open object, which will be great. It changes if it says open object and you hold down the shift key, you get whatever the shift key does, it just gives you the opposite. If you want this to always open as smart objects forevermore, you simply click on the hyperlink at the bottom of the image right down here, and workflow options will open up, and you simply need to check this open in Photoshop as smart objects. When you do that, this button down here will change to open as object. If for some reason this is how you always work and you're always using smart objects, which is really smart, but you bring something in and you don't want to open it as a smart object, you really just need it as an image file, whatever, again, holding down the shift key will simply change that to open image. But we want to open this as a smart object, and that's what we're going to do. We're actually going to open this up as a smart object, and then I need you to save this file to your desktop. And I would call it, well, this is going to be one of your assignments, but for temporary right now, let's just call this, we'll do a save as, I'm going to put mine on my desk, I'm going to put mine in my TOS folder, and I'm going to call it Castle SO for Smart Object. So CASLESO. You'll rename this for whatever your assignment name will be. But this way, at least you'll know what this thing is. And go ahead. You want to make sure that you're saving this either as a Photoshop file or as a TIFF file, one or the other. None of the other formats in here, well, none of the large document will support layers. The rest of this won't. I don't know how Photoshop PDF handles that. Anyway, so either TIFF or Photoshop. I particularly usually do Photoshop, and go ahead and hit save for that. Then we're going to simply duplicate this layer. So we're going to drag it down and copy it because I've got raw data in here. Instead of going back to the original DNG, I should be able to simply open this guy up and reprocess it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to double click on my top layer right now, and I'm going to put in the new values. So the new values for the sky were, again, if you select across the color temperature, you put in 4700. The tab key, 7 is fine for the tint. The tab key is a negative 1.5 stops, minus 1.5. Close enough. The tab key for the recovery, you want to put in 96. Hit the tab key for fill is 0. Tab key for blacks is 32. Tab key brightness is 60. Tab key contrast is 6. Tab key clarity is 100. Tab key vibrance is 0. Tab key saturation is 0. So again, the values are for your color temperature 4700, for your tint 7, for your exposure minus 1.5, for your recovery 96. Fill light is 0. Blacks are up to 32. Brightness is up to 60. Contrast is down to 6. Clarity is up to positive 100. 0 vibrance and 0 saturation, and say okay. And you go to yourself, well, that was a great idea, but oh shit. What happened? It changed the bottom one. These are true clones. This is exactly the same behavior you saw with the Coca-Colas. You changed, this is one set of raw data and 2 references to it. So when you change the raw data, both of the references, these things that we're seeing as layers, are referencing the exact same single one set of raw data. Make sense? So if you did that, hit Command Z to undo it. No, no, don't worry. There's a way. Throw away this top layer that you just made once you get it back to the normal set of colors. This is the only way you can do this, or the only way I know of to do this, so you got to pay attention to this one, because if you don't get this one thing right now, you're going to flunk the rest of your homework, and you don't want to do that. So here's the trick. We need to make a second copy of raw data. We need to make a second smart object, and we need to break the link between these two so that they are not true clones. Make sense? To do that, you should only have one smart object down here. So if you haven't gotten back to that, get back to where you've only got one. So undo that change. If you need to go all the way back in history, simply go back into history as open as smart object right up here at the top and you'll be ready to go. So now instead you come up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, and do new smart object via copy. Everybody look at the screen. This is the magic guy right here. When you do that, you will end up with a second smart object. This looks identical to the first smart object. It doesn't look like we've done anything different, but we have. If you double click on this one now and put in the new values. So again, up to color temperature and type in 4700 degrees Kelvin, hit the tab key. 7 is good for the tint. Exposure drops to a -1.5. Hit the tab key. 96 for the recovery. Tab key 0 for the fill. Tab key 32 for the blacks. Tab key 60 for the brightness. Tab key 6 for the contrast. Tab key 100 for clarity. Tab key 0 for vibrance. Tab key 0 for saturation, and then say OK. And now what you end up with is 2 smart objects, but this gets better. You've got 2 sets of raw data, and both of the XMP data for each one of those sets is intact. So if you double click on the bottom layer to go back in, you have got all the original XMP data that was used to process this layer alone. If you cancel out of that because you didn't need to make any changes and go into this one, you end up with a whole separate different set that we're done here. How the fuck do you do that in Lightroom? Right? Lightroom, you have one set of adjustments that you can make, and that's it. If you do it in a DNG, DNG gives you one set of adjustments. That's it. If you do a change in a DNG, it only remembers the most recent set that you did. It doesn't remember the other set. Then do you get into duplicating, so you've got 2 DNGs so that you can remember both different settings? Well, that's great, but they're not in the same file. This, 2 sets of raw data in the same file with individual settings that are remembered forevermore. You can open this file in 15 years, and these settings will still be here with your raw data that you can process. Game changer. Total game changer. And the reason I say this is a game changer is going back originally to what we did. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this to get out of camera raw to bring this in here. At any stage of the game now, I can actually go in and manipulate and refine these things. I can go in and change the saturation. I can go in and reprocess this shit to death. If you want to do another file, which we are going to do, I want you to grab one more of these. Simply, again, click on this top one, up to Layer, down to Smart Object, New Copy via Smart Object. It looks just like the one that it was based on. However, I want you to select the one that's in the middle, and it's only because of my layer stacking. I'm going to do a different set of processings for the castle by itself. So if you double click on the castle one, the one that's in the middle, and drag across the top, there's a third set of values we're going to put in. 6800 for the color temperature. Hit the tab key. 7 is fine for the tint. Hit the tab key. The -1.5 is fine for the exposure. Hit the tab key. 52 for the recovery. Hit the tab key. 27 for your fill. Hit the tab key. 16 for the blacks. Hit the tab key. 91 for the brightness. Hit the tab key. 68 for the contrast. Hit the tab key. 100 for the clarity. Hit the tab key and 0 vibrance, and hit the tab key 0 saturation. And now go ahead and say OK to this. This has now been processed for the castle. So if you turn off the eyeball in the top 2, you will see that this first one was processed for the ground. It's really for all this, the trees and the whatever the hell this is, heather, wheat, I don't know what it is. That's what that's processed for. If you click on the next one, you'll see that it actually opens up the castle just a little bit. It actually makes it slightly sharper as well. If you zoom in it, you'll actually see that part. And finally, if you turn on the top one is for the sky. So if you double click on the name for the very top one and rename it Sky, Then double click on the name of the one that's in the middle and rename that castle. And then you can actually do the same one on the very bottom. On the very bottom, we'll just call this the ground. Or the wheat thing, I like that. That's exactly what I would do. It's like you're sitting there thinking, well, what can I call it? I don't give a shit what I can call it, just something quick. I got to move on, right? Okay, so yeah, whatever you want to call it. All right, anyway, so we're going to make masks for all of this. So I'm going to turn off the top 2 layers because you remember, I'm going to go after the sky to begin with. That's the one that I actually want to work here in the beginning. So I'm going to go after the sky for the first one that I'm actually going to do. But I've got to turn this off because the sky, this is not a really good edge for me to try to get this to actually be made on. So I am going to, again, turn this off. I'm going to go to the quick selection tool. It's the 4th tool down. This is exactly what we've been doing before. I'm going to click and drag across this. It gives me the outline for the sky. Typically in my workflow, right off the bat, I would go up and save this as a selection. However, I know we're going to refine this guy, so I'm not going to save it at this game. I'm actually going to refine the selection first and then save it. So I'm going to go back up to my sky. I'm going to turn it on so that it is visible and apply the layer mask. And it's exactly the way I want it. However, we know there's a problem with this layer mask. So I'm going to click on the layer mask. To make sure it's active. You know it is active because it's got the brackets around it. I'm going to click the Select and Mask tool to go into the masking, Select and Mask workspace. I'm going to move this over slightly so I can see it. I'm going to click on my drop-down view and change this to On Layers. Again, what On Layers does, it shows you essentially your image with the mask in effect. So if you're doing compositing work, you'll see this is what the image is really going to look like once I put the mask together. Or once I refine the mask. We already know that there's a problem. If I zoom in here, this is exactly what we did before. I know there's the problem with the heather right here. I know there's a problem with the white outline around the castle. So I'm going to crank my radius up 2 pixels because that's what we did before. And I knew it was that by simply looking at it. Again, to see the radius, you can see it right up here. That's what it's actually impacting. Or that's the little white line that you see around here is where we're running that algorithm on. If you turn this off, again, you can use the Show Original to give yourself a before and after this. So again, the after, I think on the castle is really good, but I know it's not good enough for the heather that's in the field or for the grass or whatever the hell it is. So I go to the Refine Edge tool. It's this guy right over here. It is a brush. I make it slightly larger. Again, you don't want to make it so big, even though a really big brush would be easier to hit this space really quick. You'll also are going to then force this algorithm to be run on grass down here that you don't want it run on, and to sky up here that you also don't want it run on. You really just want this to be run on the smallest area that you possibly can. I've only painted half of this because I want to show you this. It's the reason they've actually, in the old days, this whole screen used to end up, it was just a black and white. That's all you could see. You could never really see this line right here. What they've done to change this is so that now when you're working with this brush tool, that you can actually, you have some idea of where this is, of what's going on underneath your brush. So again, you can continue to paint through all of that guy right there. That part's fine. I'm going to zoom over to the other side. I know I also need it here along the trees. And finish out here. And then finally, I'm going to zoom back out. I also know that holding down the Option key, and I'm actually going to make my brush a little bit bigger now because it's the Remove tool. And I'm going to simply click and drag across the rest of this because these were decisions that we already made the very first time we did this Refine Mask. I am going to make sure that it actually is happening, that the output of this is going to be to the layer mask, which is what is in the very bottom right down here. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And now this mask is the refined one. This is the one that I want to save. So in order to save this, there's a number of ways you can go about doing this, but I want you to get in the habit of loading these things as selections and then saving them. So to load this as a selection, you hover over the mask. It is already active. You can see it is. It doesn't need to be. You could actually be on the image layer itself, but if you simply hold down, hover over this, add the command key, you get the little hand, but it also then gives you the marching ants around it. You click on this, it loads that as a selection, and you come up to the select menu down to save selection. And I would actually call this refined castle or castle refined. S-T-T-L-E, refined. This would allow you to keep, if you wanted to keep your original selection as the castle and then wanted a refined version of it, you could do this. If you wanted to do another thing on it, refine it another way. Maybe you wanted to go in and do some handwork on here. You could refine it a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh time. All of these things get saved over here in your channels palette. The selection that we just made, that we just saved, is right here, named Castle Refined. You'll also see that there's a thing here called Sky Mask. It's this thing right here, and the reason you see it is because this layer is actually active. They used to do these in italics, and the reason they would do these in italics is this mask is only visible when you have this layer selection picked. If you select a different layer, whether you have this active or not, you do not see this castle mask in here. The only time it goes away, the only time you see that guy is when that layer is actually active and it looks like this. But the one that we saved will be there for you forevermore. You'll always be able to see it. To get rid of this, hit Command D to do a deselect. I want to select just the castle right now. This is going to be the last thing that I go after. To do that, again, I'm not going to work on this layer that's actually got that dark sky on it because I want a better edge on this. So again, I'm probably going to go back to my original version of this. Although, if you look at the castle version of this, the castle's got the blown out sky still, but it also looks like I've got more contrast between the foliage around here and the castle. Don't you guys think? So if you look at it, the ground one that we started with is basically, this is very close in tone, whereas the castle one actually gives it to me a little bit better. So this is a greater contrast edge. So I'm going to use this version to make my quick selection. Again, the quick selection tool is active. I'm going to use the bracket keys to make the tool smaller. Now remember, I want to select the castle. You cannot touch the edges of any of these edges. You can't touch where the castle meets the sky, and you can't touch where the castle meets the ground. If you do, it's actually going to ignore this line and start to look for the next one. In the case of hitting this hedge, it would probably ignore the hedge and it would probably pick up this line of wheat or heather or whatever the hell this shit is. So at any rate, you've got to make the brush small enough to actually avoid this. So I'm going to click and start to drag out. It is actually grab this part of the hedge. I'm okay with that. Don't worry about that right now. I'm going to continue to work my way through this like this and finally come down to here. I've got contamination in my selection. It's this area right here of the grass. To get rid of that, you hold down the Option key, which gives you the negative quick selection tool. And now you do want to get this as close to the edge you're trying to get it to pick as you can. Again, you can't cross the edge, but you want to get it close. So I'm just running it down to try to get rid of as much of the grass as I can get. If you get close like this, this is fine because we are actually going to use Refine Edge on this again. I see one more little space down here that I can probably get rid of, holding down the Option key and getting rid of that. I'm going to apply this then as a layer mask on my castle. So simply click, again, layer mask. And it's not putting that on there. And I have no idea why that's not putting it on there. Is it yours going on?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna, all right, Photoshop, you think you can foul me? You cannot. I'm gonna come up to the select menu and I'm gonna save this selection and I'm gonna call it Castle. And I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna hit Command D to deselect. Then I'm going to Command click to load the castle and then try to put it on there again. And yes, I got it. Fuck you. Okay, I'm going to turn off the sky temporarily, and I'm going to check again to see how this mask did. So I'm going to make sure that the mask for my castle is active. It is the one that is selected. I'm going to click on the selected mask to go into that space, and then I'm going to zoom in to the sky up here. I already know that there's a problem with this, even though I can't really see it. again, I'm going to sit here and do this on layers. Let's try this, guys. Maybe we want to keep the sky on. Let's cancel out of here, turn your sky back on, and then go into the selected mask sky right here. Let's just see what it looks like. Yeah, I'm not really getting the problem up here because the mask for my sky has actually worked out really well, although I am spotting another problem in this. But I'm going to look at this area down here, and I'm really looking for this right here, and I'm not really seeing any problem or real contamination in this. There's a number of other ways that you can actually view this. The tonality in this is so close. Even if there was a mismatch in your mask, it's probably not going to show it up. However, there are other versions that you can use, other ways that you can look at this. In your drop-down menu, you can actually change this to black and white, which will give you an idea of what your mask really looks like. Now, I spot a problem right here. This right here is probably not supposed to be in my mask, but this is a problem, and it is in my mask. To make sure I'm looking at what I think I'm looking at, again, I'm going to click on this, not show original, but I'm going to go back to on layers. This area right here, it actually picked up the edge of this, where the field right here is actually meeting this green grass. That's not supposed to be in my mask. So to fix this area right here, you've got the paintbrush tool right here. It's the paintbrush tool on here. I'm going to make my paintbrush smaller, and I'm simply going to paint this out. It's painting with white. I don't want to paint with white. Command Z to undo that. Hold down the Option key to get the negative version of this and paint this out with black. So that's actually fixed that mismatch that's actually happened right there. Again, you wouldn't really spot that per se, but it's just giving you an idea of what's going on here. There's other visions that you can actually have of this. You can do the marching ants if you want, and you'll see them right here. You can actually do this as an overlay. This is for anybody who works in quick mask mode. This would be another way to actually see how good this mask is. I see that I'm getting a mismatch on this, on the sky, but the sky mask is on top of this, and it takes care of this problem. So there's really no reason to go in and try to fix any of this part right here. What else do we get in here? You get you get it on black. You can actually get it on white. And again, the onion skin is not really of value to us in here. There's later stuff that we'll do possibly in this class where I can show you a better example of onion skin. But typically I work on layers here, but I do occasionally, I will check the mask itself that's actually being trying to be built. And I'm going to say okay to this. Now, this is now no longer the original castle that I had down here in my channels. I'm going to bring my channels palette up. This castle that I originally saved was the unrefined version of this. This has actually been refined here, and it's actually showing up as my castle mask right out here. It's interesting. I've misnamed this. This castle refined actually here should have been named Sky Refined, because that's what it's masking. So you can change the name actually in the channels palette. You can double click on that name to change this to Sky Refined, which it is. The castle right here has still got that anomaly in it. That's the way it was selected. So if I want to save the refined version of this guy, I simply come back here. I command click to load this, so I've just command clicked it on the mask right here. I can come up and save that selection, and I would call this Castle Refine. Command click selected what was in this mask right here, which does not have this little jaggy guy in it. So if I hit Command D to deselect that and look at the refined version, you see that that guy is actually gone. So this was the initial one that I made. This is the refined version of it. However, what we've got going now, I'm going to select the RGB up here at the very top. If you double click on the hand, you will actually reduce your image. What it does is double clicking on the hand will give you your entire image as big as it can be and still show it to you on the screen. If you double click the magnifying glass, it goes to 100%. But the hand, which I find a whole lot more useful, is a quick way to jump out if you've actually been magnified on this. And now take a look at what we've got. We've got the sky that's been developed, we've got the castle that's been developed, and we've got the ground that's been developed. All three of these can be changed. So if all of a sudden somebody says, wow, I'd really love to see that sky black and white, again, I personally would add a layer onto this, an adjustment layer, but conceivably you could go into this, double clicking on it because you have access to the raw data. If you click over to this fourth icon across the top, the HSL grayscale, you could actually convert this to grayscale and say, okay, you now have a grayscale sky. If you didn't like that, you can actually go right back in there and click on the same thing and uncheck that convert to grayscale and say okay. But the bigger issue here is that you've still got all the power to actually control reprocessing raw data over and over and over again. Why on earth would you use a soft light layer to do your dodging and burning? Why on earth would you use a curve to do your dodging and burning? You reprocess your raw data. You can do things with this reprocessed raw data that you could never do with a curve, ever. Make sense? The final thing in all of this is that the one problem that you have on working on smart objects like this is when we were processing the file. So if you double click on the raw data version, the smart object for the sky, the one here in the very top, we reprocess this thing, but there's no way for us to really see this with the castle that was processed a different way and with the field that was processed a different way. We don't have the advantage of seeing this all together as one. So what ends up happening a lot of times is you'll get into Photoshop like this and you'll say, somebody will say, oh, come on, the sky is just way too dramatic. It would never be that strong. You've overdone the sky. So you could go back in, you could double click in the sky again, you could come in and you could actually drop this down. You could reduce how much exposure you've done. But this gets to be a pain in the ass. So what am I gonna do? I'm gonna reduce this by 1 stop, and then the recovery by 30 points, and then the blacks by 10 points. And are you really gonna do that? No, you're not gonna do that. Pain in the ass. What you're gonna do instead is you're gonna make the top layer active and you're gonna simply reduce its opacity. And you simply drop it back and you can dial it in. Game changer. You can do shit now. I'm telling you right now, you can do stuff now that 90% of the professional retouchers in the world can't do. They're too stupid. They don't understand this. They haven't gone this far. They're in here with curves trying to get that sky black, and it never looks right because they never reprocessed the data. They're taking a baked file and they're trying to make it look dark. If you're like Rebecca, who's really good at this, because I'm still shocked. I've never seen anybody, whenever I remember last week, I said, okay, see how dark you can make the sky just using a curve? Never seen anybody do it that well. I'm just throwing that out there. Kudos to you. But if you remember looking at her curve, it was really what she had done. If there was anything that had any detail in it at all, that all would have gone. It would have just been obliterated. Tonally, it would have been fractured. Does that make sense? So working on raw data like this to do these real extreme moves is the way to go. And then using opacity in here to balance stuff back and forth is another way to go. Are there questions about this? All right. We are much further ahead of the game than I actually thought we were going to be. So hang on. That doesn't mean we're done. Oh, save this. This is your homework. This is one of your assignments. This is assignment I think it's 2.1, 3.1, is that what I think? Or 3.2, sorry. We'll look at that in just a second. Let me see what else we've got going on in here. Okay, we're good on that, Okay, we're good on that. One last thing that I do need to go through, and we have just enough time to do this right now. For those of you who were in my first class today, you've already seen part of this. You're going to see another small part of it right now. But it's something that we need to, I feel like it's important to understand in the whole digital realm, the whole digital world. So I go through this in all of my classes. So if you've seen this before, my apologies. If you know this and you're feeling good about it, you can leave. If you haven't, you should stay. And so here we go.
Can we exit the castle now?
Yeah, you can exit but save it because that's your file. Okay. So in this illustration, and pardon the illustration, this is my handiwork. You can see why I'm a photographer now, not an illustrator. Yes. Oh, yeah. Why don't we do that first? That's actually a good call. Okay, so let me get out of this really quickly. How to turn in your homework. So if you look at for instance, the file that you just made, and then we'll talk about the ones that you're going to turn in for this week. I mean, that you've already done to turn in this week. If you look up again, if you go to the Moodle site, at the very top, it tells you how to actually do this. So let me turn editing off here so this gets a little more stretched out. So what I want you to do for the assignments that you turn into this class, the assignment is going to be your last name underscore your first name underscore the assignment number underscore the image number. So for instance, in the assignment that we did, your very first one, it was to create the DNG profile for each of the captures in the assignment folder. Now, let me see what this assignment really says. Create a DNG for each with the color passport checker, which is the better choice. For the capture session in the assignment folder, name the profile with the respective raw file name. Save the profiles to use them. Complete instructions can be found on page 38, whatever, not of the manual. How many people in this room then went and grabbed those profiles out of the location where they were in the application support folder of the library? How many didn't? That's okay. Don't worry about it. I'm not grading you on assignment number 1. For assignment number 2, the only reason I don't feel like it's fair to grade you on that because I never showed you. I showed you how to do that today. I didn't show you how to do that last week. However, applying that custom DNG profile and doing color balance on your files, I do expect you to have done, and this is what it says and what I want you to actually turn in. So for this one, you're going to create the custom DNG profile, and you're going to save the color-corrected CR2 files with the XMP sidecar files. So if we go back and we look at the original one that we did, the very first one we did when you guys walked in today, it should be on your desktop. It was this guy right here. It's this thing right here. Now, remember, I created the DNG profile for this, but I've not done the color correction on this yet. So I'm going to do it right now. I'm simply going to click on this, hold down the Command key to click on the second one. When I bring these into Photoshop, they come in just like this. Again, I click on this first guy to color balance it. I change its camera profile to, again, not Adobe Standard, but the version 11 one that I had actually done. I do a select all here. I do a sync settings. I do everything and say okay. And then you don't actually have to open these up in Photoshop. So you can actually just hit done. And when you do that, you will now see in this folder that you've got the raw file right here and an XMP file for it. Another raw file and another XMP file for it right here. Now, you've got a number of these that you actually had to do. So my suggestion is instead of renaming each one of these individual files separately, that you do this instead. I'm going to create a brand new folder, and I'm going to do it also on my desktop. Command N to create a new folder, and I'm going to name it the way I want you to name the assignment. So it's going to be, in my case, Engelhard. ENGELHARD underscore Verser underscore, and then the assignment was 2.2. So that's what you would put in here. And so underscore right here. .2. And then there's a whole bunch of files that I asked you to do this to. There was like 4 different sets of shootings. You don't need to rename any of those files because this folder has got the assignment that I'm looking for in there. Does that make sense? And simply throw the files that for this assignment in this folder, and this folder is what you will then drop onto the Dropbox. So I can't show you the Dropbox on my computer here, but I can show it to you on this guy right here and how you get to it. So
You don't want the DNG.
I don't need the DNG, no. If you've got the DNG and you want to throw it in, I can actually check to see your profile is in there. But don't worry about it. I actually had rewritten these instructions for the spring semester, but the spring semester has got one class more than the fall semester. And so I haven't rewritten these assignments for the fall version of this class. So you guys get the advantage of that. If that sounded like a bad thing for you, it's not. It's actually a good thing. Anyway, throw those files into here, and then this is what you would turn in. If you look at this, I'm going to change the projector to the other input really quickly. So then again, you would click on this thing that looks like a little cube down here. This is how you get to the class projects partition. Once you get to that guy, you scroll down and you find Engelhard, and in Engelhard you should see a Dropbox. Now, I've got two two folders in here. I don't think you're going to see either one of these. I think the only thing you get to see is this Dropbox. You will see the assignments and you will see this other one, but once you click on Dropbox, I don't think you guys see anything inside it, do you? No. So you simply drop your folders on that, and we'll see, because we've got people doing it right now. I'm going to leave this screen up. You need to make sure before you leave today that everything that you want it to turn into is actually on this guy. If it's not, we need to figure out why, and we need to get it there. So that's how you would turn in the assignments for assignment 2.2. For assignment 2.3 was the castle that we did not only last week, but we did it again today. We did it as regular layers, not as smart object layers. That's what assignment number 2.4 was about. So you would simply rename that castle file, the one that we did last week in class, the one that we did at the beginning of this class, because we did it twice. You would simply turn that in again as your name. In my case, it would be Engelhard _ Verser _ 2.4. For this other file that I asked you to dodge and burn, I think it's the one of the girl holding a shopping bag walking down the street in front of a window. I think that's the one. For that one, you would name it again. In my case, it would be Engelhard _ Verser _ 2.3, and then you simply drop those files here into the Dropbox, and I'll see the difference. So when I go to actually do grade Tyke's work right here, it's already, I know that this is assignment 2.2, that this is 2.3, and this is 2.4, and I'm good to go. In this case, he actually only had a single file. Well, he's actually got two files in here, which is fine. So he's done a couple of copies in here. That's great. So he's put this all in a single folder. It looks like in this one, he only did a single one. He could have renamed just this file with this name. The fact that he put it in a folder is fine. I don't care about that. But that way I know what it's intended for. Make sense? Also, if you are late for an assignment, you would do this same thing. Don't go into changing weeks numbers or assignment numbers. Don't worry about any of that. If you're turning in a late assignment, if it's for assignment 2.3, it would still be named as 2.3, even if you turn it in on the last day of class. Okay.
Can you delete that?
Individually, or would you want them in like one folder?
Don't put them in a single folder. That gets to be too hard for me to grade. So if you want to, so for instance, if you look again at Tyke's right here, 2.2 asks you to do, there was, I think, 4 separate scenarios. There was the guy in the bar, there was a girl by a car, there was the shopping bag girl, and I think somebody else, but I don't really remember. So in this case, all of those were for assignment 2.2, so you can throw all of those in. You don't need to rename those. Did that answer what you're asking, Rebecca?
Yes.
Sure.
Huh? Sure? You could. Okay, so this is the other thing.
More information, pretty much what I was thinking was that, like, if you wanted to say, so we have 4 assignments, right, for week 2. If you wanted us to have it in, like, a week 2
One
folder.
giant folder. No, do not do that. No, that actually makes my grading a whole lot harder. Yes.
In that case, can you delete my?
Yes, I can. Yeah, that's okay, guys. It's the first time we're doing this, so we can actually get away with this. Tyler, right?
Yep.
Okay. So then, yeah, Tyler, just fix it and redrop.
Okay. So like this 2.2 folder would be fine to drop, and then the individual files.
Yes. Okay, so see, Rebecca's done this right here, and this works out perfect. In her case, she actually added the image number. So for instance, she could have, if she wanted to, pulled out every single one of the individual files for here that she actually worked on, and it could have been named 2.2.1, 2.2.2, 2.2.3, 2.2.4. She could have separated them that way as well. Either way, it doesn't make any difference. This is fine though. This is great. Okay, are there questions about that guy? All right. Well, the good news is,
I kind of fudged around and I figured out how to find
okay, should we look at where they are again?
it. No, I was saying they were asking because I have a 2.1
Right.
and that's
Oh,
fine.
okay. Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I get what that is. I'll check. Don't worry about it. Okay. So this thing about linear gamma is what I really want to get to right now. Let me trade back to my computer so that you guys are looking at that screen instead. I'll flash this up at the end so everybody can make sure that all their stuff got put in. Okay. So at any rate, if you look at our Moodle site, there is this PDF right here called Linear Gamma. This was actually written by two guys, Bruce Fraser and Jeff Shewy. And it explains exactly what I'm going to try to get across to you guys right now. So anyway, it's these two guys right here. This guy, actually, it's not Jeff Shewy. It's only Bruce Fraser. This guy right here was a absolute guru god of all things Photoshop. Unfortunately, he died very young. The file that you've been working on, the castle thing, is actually one of his files. Anyway, this guy was absolutely amazing. His writing was amazing. So nonetheless, this will help get you through some of these issues about linear gamma, but I've tried to make it hopefully in a way that's a little bit easier to understand, but no good deed goes unpunished. So at any rate, okay. So back to this. What this is an illustration of is this. These are electronic scales, and they're connected to a computer. And on the scale on the right-hand side, there's a 1 ounce weight. There's a single 1 ounce weight on it. And you add 1 ounce weight to the right-hand side. And you say to the computer, did I add, how much weight did I add? How much do you sense that I add? Did I add the same amount that was on the right-hand side? And so what do you guys think the computer is going to do? Is it going to sense that it added 1 ounce? It should. It should say, yeah, okay, you've added 1 ounce. I get that. I understand that. The weight that you put on here was the same one that we started with over here, right? Then I'm going to add a 2nd ounce to this. Now, I'm not looking for total weight. This is more. This weight here is more. But will the computer understand that the additional ounce that I added, is that the same weight as was originally started with over here? And it should. It should say, well, okay, yeah, that's just 2 ounces. And so, again, it's going to say that, yep, you added 1 ounce. I'm going to do it again. The 3rd time I do this, I'm putting a 1 ounce on here. And again, the total weight here is heavier than the total weight here. That's not what I'm asking the computer to tell me. What I'm saying to the computer is, did I add the same amount of weight that we originally started with? And the computer says, sure, I know this. And it keeps going on and on like this until we get all the way up to the top, right? Every single one. It understands that each time I added an increment, the increment that I added was equal to the original one that I started with. Does that make sense, what I'm talking about here? Are we good on this one? Okay. And don't need to worry about that. This is a linear scale. What we just looked at is a linear scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and all the way up is a linear scale. It doesn't have to be single digits. It can be 100, 200, 300, 400. It's also a linear scale. What you need to know about linear scales is this, is that the difference between an 8 and a 9 is exactly the difference between a 3 and a 4. There's only one between each one of these. The difference between 1 and 2 is 1. The difference between 6 and 7 is 1. The difference between 9 and 10 is 1. Does that make sense? Linear scale. In the hundreds, it works the very same. The difference between 100 and 200 is 100. The difference between 400 and 500 is 100. So each one of these steps is linear. Make sense? Okay. Debbie, on the other hand, is blindfolded. Now, we can go into all sorts of reasons and whys about all this, but that's for a different class, different story. That's for when we go out drinking tonight or some other time. Oh, no, right? Okay. At any rate, Debbie needs to be blindfolded in this scenario because I don't want Debbie to actually see what I'm putting in her hands. So she's got her hands out like this. She can't see what's going on in here, and I put a 1 ounce weight in this hand, just like I had done with the scale. Then I actually add 1 ounce into her right hand, and I say to Debbie, did I just add the same amount of weight that was in your right hand? And what do you think she's going to think? How much weight do you sense that I have added? And she's going to say 1 ounce, and she would be correct. However, now I'm going to trick her. I'm not going to put another 1 ounce in there. I'm actually going to put 2 ounces in there. And she's like this, and I'm going to say, Debbie, did I add the same amount of weight that we started with, the same amount of weight that is in this hand right now? Is she going to say, no, you added more weight? Or is she going to say, yes, you added the same amount that's in my right hand? Any guesses?
Yes.
We've got a yes.
And then doubles.
Yeah, we've got a yes. We've got a lot of I don't knows. The truth of the matter is, I'm going to say, how much weight do you sense I've just added to your left hand, to your right hand? And she's going to say 1 ounce, and that would be correct. That is what she senses. I'm now going to add 4 ounces to this hand. That's 1/4 pound. 4 ounces, and I'm going to say, Debbie, did I just add the exact same amount of weight that's in your right hand? Now again, the total weight here, it's building. I'm not asking her for total weight. I'm asking her if this 4 ounces that I just added here, does she sense that as 4 ounces, or does she sense that is this 1 ounce? And the truth of it is, she senses this as 1 ounce. My next move, I'm going to add 8 ounces. That's 1/2 pound. Debbie, did I just add that same amount of weight that you're holding in your right hand again to this scale? And she's going to go, you added 1 ounce. That's what she is going to sense. This keeps going on. I'm going to add 16 ounces, that's 1 pound, to her hand. And she's blindfolded, and I'm going to say, did I just add the same amount of weight that you are holding in your other hand? And she's going to say, yes, you did. Now, the reason I do this as an illustration is because how many people in this room right now are going, that is such bullshit. There is no way that can happen. Go ahead and raise your hand if you think that's a bullshit. Okay. That's fine. Stay with me. Don't need to look at those. These are logarithmic scales. The scale in this case is an exponential. Don't let the word logarithmic scare you. Don't let the word scale or exponential scare you. Don't worry about that stuff. This is what it is at its simplest. If you look at this example right here, this is a logarithmic progression. And it's a doubling. So we start with 1, we double it, we get 2. Doubled again, we get 4. Doubled again, we get 8. Doubled again, we get 16. Doubled again, we get 32. Doubled again, 64. Doubled again, 128. It goes on and on and on. But what's different about this than the linear scale is, remember, in the linear scale, the difference in any two of these that are right next to one another was the exact same as any of these two right next to each other. That is not the case in a logarithmic scale. The difference in 1 and 2 is 1, but the difference in 64 and 128 is 64. They are not the same jumps. A linear scale is exactly the same jumps. A logarithmic one is not. So when we look at this, this is a linear scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. This is a logarithmic scale. Does this seem familiar to anybody? How to F, yeah, no, never seen that before. That was actually good. Good shot. Quick, and right on the money. Logarithmic scale. Is anybody, okay, f-stops. How does the f-stop system actually work? What is the difference in F2 and F2.8 in terms of the amount of light? If I go from F2 and I stop down to F2.8, I cut my light in half, right? If I go from F2.8 and open up to F2, I double my light. Each f-stop is a doubling or halving of light, right? Is there anybody who's not really familiar with that concept? Okay, so the difference between F16 in F22. If I go from F16 to 22, I double the light. If I go to F8, I double it again. If I go to F5.6, I double it again. To 4, I double it again. To 2.8, I double it again. To F2, I double it again. Why the fuck did they do that? Some just wicked, weird old chemistry film science guy back in the 1800s just said, oh, wow, why don't we do that? Because we'll just fuck people up. And, you know, I mean, who can deal with this, right? The reason they did this is because this is exactly the way your eyes see. Your eyes are logarithmic. They are not linear. So you remember Debbie holding the weights? Every sense in your body is logarithmic. It is not linear. Your sensation of weight is not linear. Your sense of smell is not linear. Your sense of taste is not linear. Your eyeballs, your vision is not linear. They are all logarithmic. So you have a cup of tea. You throw in 1 teaspoon. And you say to whoever put that teaspoon in there for you, I would like you to add another teaspoon. I want this to be twice as sweet as it is. They don't add 1 teaspoon. In order for you to have the sense that they've actually added 1 teaspoon, you actually have to add 2 teaspoons. Then you say to them, I want you to add 1 more teaspoon. I want you to add the same amount of sweetness that we started with, that 1 teaspoon. Well, your next step is 4 teaspoons of sugar to get there. Your next step would be 8 teaspoons of sugar to get there. Your next step, 16 teaspoons of sugar. 16 teaspoons of sugar have got to go in that cup of tea for you to have the sense that only 1 has been added once you reach that point in the scale. Does that make sense? And the reason, again, is that your senses are logarithmic. That is the reason that f-stops were created this way. F-stops function exactly the way your eyes function. You see this as, if you were to look at, if you were to actually do, if you were to take a picture of a gray wall and you were to bracket it, and you were to start at its normal exposure, and let's say the normal exposure is right here in the middle at F8, and you did a bracket of F2 to 8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22, and you looked at that scale, at that gray scale, every one of those steps would seem to be the same to you. The jump from F16 to F22 would seem the same as the jump from 2.8 to 4. However, that's not the case in light at all. If we look at this on a board and we actually lay this out, we are going to do it in photons. That's what we'll actually do it in. So I just need a unit of light. It doesn't matter whether it's a photon. It doesn't matter whether it's an EV. A lot of people will do it in candelas. Oh, we did. Did we do monitor calibration last week? We did it in this class. Remember when we did candelas and we actually measured, it was the brightness of our monitors and it should have been 120 candelas per square meter. That's just an issue of light, amount of brightness. So let's do candelas. Why not? All right, so I'm going to start with our f-stop scale right here. We'll start at 2.8 and then we'll go to 4, to 5, 6, to 8, to 11, to 16, and to 22. And we'll just stop here. And let's say that for argument's sake, this is, yeah, I'll go in this direction, that this is 1 candela is what F22 gives me. It lets in 1 candela of light. I'm just picking an arbitrary number, right? How many candelas does F16 let in? 2. It's a doubling, right? I open up 1 stop, I double the amount of light that comes in. So this would be 2 candelas. If I go to F11, how many candelas come in? 4. If I go to F8, how many candelas come in? 8. And F5, 6? 16. And F4?
32.
And 2.8? 64. So what you see is that the jump here from F22, in my first jump right here, there's 1 candela difference. But I see this jump. I see the tone from here. Again, if I were to shoot this as a grayscale and this was my bracket, the jump from F22 to 16, that gray division right here would seem to me to be identical to this one right here. It would be a perfectly even step wedge. I would be looking at tones. I wouldn't see it skewed to one side or the other. I would have a perfect gray ramp in front of me, and it would seem to be going from black or from dark to light. It wouldn't look like all of a sudden here, this, oh my God, the step here is this is a jump of 32 candelas. that this somehow is 32 tones wider, that this whole thing is 32 tones wider than this first little one on the end? That wouldn't make sense. That's not how it works, right? Your eyes are logarithmic, so your eyes see each one of these jumps as being exactly the same, even though they're not. Make sense? Okay, so there's a issue with this, and this is what the issue is, and this is why your senses are logarithmic. If you look at this scale right here, the blue little guys that go along here is a linear scale. It just starts from 1 and goes to 8. And every single one of these is exactly the same. The difference in 4 and 5 is 1, and 5 and 6 is 1, and 6 and 7 is 1. This is a linear scale. This is 8 steps of a linear scale. We get all the way from 1 to 8. Yeah. In a logarithmic world, though, in that very same 8 steps, you go from 1 to 128. Look at the difference in range here. So when you are God and you decided to design human beings, and you said, I want to give them eyeballs that can not only see the detail on the ground in the shadow underneath a car, but also see the bright, totally blinding, direct hit by the sun side of the car, white panel, that I can see that all at the same time, that I have this extraordinary range. God said, okay, to do that, I need to make those eyeballs logarithmic, because I'm never going to get this to happen linearly.
That's exactly what it said.
That's exactly what, or she.
It's
I'm
fine.
totally, or they. Whoever it is, one, whatever, however you want to phrase it, whatever pronoun you want to use, run with it. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
But we have a problem, and the problem is this. Monitors are linear. Sensors in a camera are linear. Your sensor in your camera sees these blue divisions. This is how it actually sees what it's recording. This is what your raw file is. However, your eyes don't see it that way. Your eyes actually expect this ramp. So you have to apply, the way they fix this is they put a curve on it. They put this thing, it's called gamma correction. Gamma just stands for the shape of the curve. So, not to get too deep into this, is there any math geeks in this room? Okay, then I won't get into it any
Just
deeper.
kidding.
Anyway, suffice it to say, gamma strictly is the shape of a curve. And we know that in Photoshop, if you have a curve, you can actually, if this is your straight line curve right here that doesn't change anything, but if you do a curve like that, it actually brightens the image up considerably. That's exactly what they do to actually fix this problem. So they take this linear data, the blue is what your camera actually gives you, and they put a wicked curve on it, and this is what happens. It changes it to match the slope of this logarithmic guy. Why does that matter to us? Have we talked about why 18% gray is 18% gray in this class? Did we go through that? Okay, well, why is 18% gray? Why isn't 50%?
It's the middle logarithmic.
Exactly. In a logarithmic scale, it's the middle. Typically, this is the response of film. There's a 5-stop response that you get in film. You get actually 6 in digital. You get a little bit extended. The reason you get 6 in digital is this original 5-stop. This was based on Ansel Adams' zone system. Anybody in this room ever heard of Ansel Adams?
Yes.
He was the guy who invented this thing, along with another guy named Minor White. They developed the zone system, and basically what they're talking about here is the distance between maximum highlight detail and maximum shadow detail. And so what they said was that, and again, they just did a whole bunch of experiments, and they just looked at it, and they said a typical print that you would have can reproduce about 5 stops worth of information. That you start up here with your, and I'm talking about highlight detail now. I'm not talking about, in the true zone system, there's actually 10 stops. But anything beyond zone 7, zone 5 is considered the middle. Zone 6 would be light Caucasian skin. Zone 7 is the last place where you have full highlight detail. Zone 8, you can sense texture, but you don't really have full detail. Zone 9 is, you've lost all texture, but it is not page white. Zone 10 is page white. Going the other direction, zone 4 is about the color of dark blue jeans. Zone 3 is the last place that you get full detail, full shadow detail. Zone 2, you've lost full shadow detail, but you do sense texture. Zone 1, you actually lose the absence of that texture, but it's not pure black. And zone 0 would be considered pure black, the blackest that your paper can actually make. That gets extended by 1 stop in digital because to be really honest with you, inkjet printers have a better reproducible range, a larger dynamic range than do a typical gelatin silver paper. So you actually get a half a stop more in the high end and a half stop more on the low end. So we're going to look at both. In the case of this, if you start at 100%, which would be the complete amount of light coming back to you, it's pure white. If we cut this in half, one stop down, you get 50%. Again, it's a logarithmic scale. If you cut it in half again, you get down to 25%, logarithmic scale. Cut it in half again, you get to 12.5%. Cut it in half again, you get to 6.25%. Cut it in half again, you get to 3.125%. So if you start here, this is 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops, 4 stops, 5 stops. Your range is from 3.5% of the light coming back to you off of the printed surface to 100% of the light coming back off to you. You can, in theory, keep doing this down forever. This keeps going on, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But the truth of the matter is, if you're only getting roughly 3% of light coming back off a piece of paper to you, you perceive that as being black. You'll never get to 0. You can keep dividing this forever. You will never get to 0. However, this is the range, 5-stop range. What is half of 5? 2.5, right? So if I want to go back 2.5 stops, this is 1 stop, 2 stops, 2.5 stops goes right here, right? Exactly between 12.5 and 25%. What's exactly between 12 and 25%? 18. That's why you have 18% gray. You can take this and go out tonight and tell all your friends that you can explain to them why 18% gray is gray and that they can't. And you just say, you know, I'm going to be really kind to you and not tell you the loser that you really are. If you buy me a beer, I'll explain it to you, and then you won't be a loser. The same thing works in digital, but in digital, you actually get an extra stop. So in digital, this drops down, and it goes to, what's half of 1 and 3? Okay, it would be 1 and 5/16, 1 and 9/16. Close enough. There's no math geeks in here, so don't bust me if this is wrong. It's close enough. 1 and 9/16%, you actually get that extra stop in range, in dynamic range. So again, now I've got 6 stops of dynamic range. What's half of 6? 3. So again, 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops. Right here, 12.5% is middle gray, and they just rounded down to 12%. Now you know why Sekonic meters, newer Sekonic meters, actually do a metering. They're expecting a meter, a grayscale, expecting a gray card if you use one of 12%, of not 18%, which is the standard that Kodak did always, right? Does this make sense? Okay, and this is what it looks like right here. That's actually the raw logarithmic response of digital. So this is the issue. Everything that we're working with, all of these sensors, scanners, monitors, they are all linear devices. They measure voltage in, voltage out. That's how they work. If you were to look at a file, just a regular raw file that you pulled off, that you didn't do any processing to, you didn't do any correction at all, it would look like this. It would be extremely dark, and if you could get a histogram on it, which is virtually impossible, but nonetheless, if you could, this is actually what the histogram would look like. You would see all of it bunched up here at the shadow end of it all. The linear corrected version of this, that's what it's supposed to look like. That's the picture that you took. This is what your camera sees. It has to go through processing, either through Camera Raw or through C1 Pro or all of the processors. They're actually doing this work right here. They are doing this linear correction for you. But this is the problem, and the reason I bring this up, because otherwise it just becomes this esoteric thing, and it's like, well, gee whiz, first you showed me what middle gray was, I don't really care. But this you should care about. In the digital world, because digital is linear, we need to think about data. And data works in this very same one-stop range. But because data is linear in a digital world, you need to think of it this way. A typical camera actually will grab, older series camera will actually do 12 bits of data. Now, I'm not looking at an RGB image here, I'm looking at just a grayscale. RGB just complicates this. In an RGB, it's this very same thing happens, but it's just in 3 channels. You've got 3 channels of red. I mean, you've got 1 channel, this many tones of red, this many tones of red. I mean, you get that, right? So I'm just going to do this as a grayscale example. In a grayscale example, what happens in a 12-bit image is you have 4,096 possible tones of gray. Those are data points. Those are points of data. That's information that builds your image, right? However, because it's linear, the top one f-stop of your exposure has half of the data of your file. Well, what are the consequences of that? Well, the consequence of that is that if you underexpose your file by one stop, you throw half of your data away. Half of the data that you could use to make an image, you pitch. If you're 2 stops underexposed, 3/4 of your data is gone. Can you make a good image with only 1/4 of the data? Not even close. Why does this become a problem? Well, this becomes a problem because how many people in this room have the highlight warning on the back of their camera? You take a picture of something and that little red light blinks and it says, we're blowing these highlights out, worry, worry, worry. Time to underexpose, you need to worry about this. Anybody do that?
Yeah, but that's the JPEG.
Exactly, it is a JPEG. What you're looking on the back of that is a JPEG, not your raw file, but a JPEG. So it's telling you, you need to start underexposing. What it's basically telling you to do is you need to start throwing away data. Data that your raw file could actually keep and use, but it's saying, fuck, throw it away. Make shitty images. My advice to everybody is take a piece of duct tape and cover the back of your camera with it. Don't ever look at one of those images again. They are all lies. They are processed JPEGs. It's not your raw data at all. So, how bad does this problem get? We'll get to it in just a second. We're almost done, guys. 5 minutes away. The brightest stop has half of your data in it. If you are not capturing that, you are throwing away data that can actually make your image, and your images suck. The next brightest stop, again, each one of these goes into half. The problem and the issue that we've got right here is, let's say I do underexpose this by one stop. I throw half of this data away, but also my shadows down here are described by next to no data at all. Why is there noise in your shadows? Isn't that where noise is? You ever see noise in the highlights? Never. You always pick it up in the shadows. That's because there's no data down here to describe it at all. And if you start underexposing, this keeps getting chopped off less and less and less. So this becomes a huge problem. At any rate, this is what a linear distribution actually looks like. This is what the gamma corrected version looks like. And you can see each one of these is an even step. You would say that the jump in tone from here to here is the same as from here to here. But you would never say the jump in tone from here to here is the same as from here to there. Again, the issue here is the difference in linear and logarithmic. So this is what actually happens in your camera. This is the linear distribution that's gathered. Once it's corrected, that's what happens. And not only does this happen, but again, that whole, yikes, that whole top, that whole top end, that 50% is your data part. Oh, actually, that's the end of it. Okay. So why does this matter? And I got 5 minutes to tell you why this matters. So you are the person who went out and bought your brand new Sekonic meter. And your Sekonic meter, because it is new and it's digital, it's expecting a 12% gray. But you've got your handy trusty Kodak 18% gray card. You know, if you put your gray card in the scene and you point your Sekonic meter at it to get a reflected reading off of it, and it gives you a number that you should actually be exposing to, whatever, you run into a mismatch here. And what does that mismatch mean? Well, your gray card is 18%. However, your camera is expecting, or the meter is expecting it to be 12%. 12% is darker than 18%. So in order to make this appear 12%, it asks you, or it gives you an exposure that will underexpose your file. How much underexposure? One stop of this is actually 9%. That's a one-stop difference. A 12% difference is a minus 2/3 of a stop. How many people in this room shoot Canon? How many people in this room set their ISO on their Canon to 100 and believe it's 100? It isn't. All camera manufacturers lie. For anybody who ever shot film, all film people lied too. Everybody re-rated their film. Everybody who shot tracks at 400 ASA, everybody re-rated it to 320 because they lie. Camera manufacturers lie as well. There is a website that's actually, I think there's a link on our site to it. If there's not, somebody post it if you really want to see it. There's a company called DxO that's actually done exhaustive testing of every single camera sensor that's out there. and they actually will plot what the true ISOs are of your camera. The true ISO of every Canon camera I've ever owned, the reality is it says that 100 ISO actually is a 72 ISO. So again, what's the difference in these two? Well, one stop down from 100 ISO would be 50. So right here, roughly in the middle, the ISO line is another minus 1/2 of a stop, because your camera, it's telling you it's 100. It's not as sensitive as it's saying it is. So if you take these two things, only these two things, and add it up, you end up with about a stop and a 1/6. That's more than half of your data you've thrown away because you didn't know any better. Because you believed your meter and you believed the camera manufacturer. Both lies. The solution is this. This gets rid of all of that. If you take a picture of this and set this white point, set your exposure to give this little white patch to be between 245 and 250, you don't care what your ISO was. You don't care if you put filters on the front of your camera and they've killed some of your light. You don't care what your meter says. You don't care about any of those things. This will give you maximum exposure. You don't want to go too far, because going too far, again, the problem that you have if you overexpose by too much is that the sensor cannot accept the light of the additional exposure, and it just discards it. That's what they call highlight clipping. But has anybody in here heard in this room, and then we're almost done, guys, exposed to the right? If you've ever heard exposed to the right, what they're trying to say to you when they talk about exposing to the right is this. They're trying to say to you that you should be driving your exposure so that you're at least something up here is beginning to hit the high end, to the right side. This is where your highlights are. That you should be exposing to really drive those highlights, but you don't want to drive them too far. If you drive them too far, that additional information is lost. Does that make sense? We good on this? Okay, one final thing I'm going to show you is this, and then you guys are out of here. There is a program I'll be happy to give to anybody if they want that will actually do this for you. I did this in my assistant class this morning. Oh, sorry, wrong one. So we've been looking at this file all along. I'm going to open this back up into Photoshop again. This is what this file actually looks like. And I'm going to go ahead. All I've done is color correct this. I haven't changed any of the exposures on this guy, and I'm simply going to open this as an image. There's a program that I have. It's called MakeTIFF. It actually will process any file that you've got. It's this little thing right here. It will process any file that you've got to actually create an uncorrected version of your raw data. So there is no demosaicing. It's not going in and trying to figure out the missing colors for each pixel. And there is no gamma correction. This is what that exact same file looks like. This is what your camera is actually shooting. You see any difference? This is what your camera, this is linear. It's what your camera actually sees. It's what it records. This is the gamma corrected version of it. Can you imagine underexposing this by stopping a 1/6 more? There's nothing to work with. Does this make sense? The reason I'm telling you this, and it's the final thing I'm going to leave you with, is this. So, lighting ratios still matter. If you're doing a portrait, for instance, you do typical Rembrandt lighting, right? We're going to do a big light on this side, and we're going to do a small fill card on this side. Typical portrait lighting, everybody does it, right? And I've got a lighting ratio here. I've got more light coming from here than on my fill side. So my face over here is a little bit in shadow. My face over here is highlight. It gives my face dimension. It gives my boobs dimension. It's a great thing. I'll save that for a lighting class, never mind. It's what gives dimension. The highlights and shadows are what build in dimension, right? You still need to keep that going. However, this side of my face is what you want to drive to the right. This is what you would want to try to get this side of my face, the light side of my face, using this card to get this card, that white patch on this, up in that 245 to 250 range. The ratio you want to keep. You don't want everything to be all lit and opened up. You need to keep this ratio, but whatever is the brightest part of your image is what you're trying to get to that 245, 250 range, maximizing your exposure. Then, if you want to make your images really dark and moody, I hear this all the time. If you want to make your images dark and moody, you shoot it that way. That is totally wrong. Shooting your images is no longer exposure like it used to be in film. Shooting your images now is gathering data. You take that data and you process your image down and make your image really dark and moody in post. You do not expose it that way. If you expose it that way, you have little to no data to work with, and you can only make shitty images. So remember, it's a rich data set that you want, and you process that any way you want. Bright, super intense image, really dark, moody image, doesn't matter. Does this make sense? Because I know a lot of, if you ultimately graduated into this game and become retouchers, that kind of stuff, if that happens, not that they will, but if it does, a lot of retouchers actually work with photographers on set. Stephen Meisel, actually Pascal Dukin, the head guy in New York, sits next to Stephen Meisel while he shoots. And they talk about what they need to do to make the best image for him to retouch. Not the best image on screen, the best thing for him to actually work with. And it's how you guys also need to start thinking about your work. How do I generate the best data set for me to work on? Not what the image should look like being captured. We good? All right, I'll see you guys next week. Yeah. Yeah.